and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hey guys, welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories. We're really glad to be bringing you the 150th episode of the podcast, which has been quite the labor of love. We've been going on for over 6 years now, and a big thank you to all our guests and the listeners who have kept us motivated to keep going. To celebrate 150 episodes, we are bringing back a very special guest and one of our favorite persons who has already been on the podcast once before, Ila Reddy, to the Musafir Stories. Ila is a traveler and a dear listener as well, who was previously on the podcast covering an episode on Nagaland. So let's hop onto the episode and find out where Ila is taking us to today. So with that introduction, we'd love to welcome back Ila Reddy to the Musafir Stories. Ila, thank you so much for coming back to the podcast and welcome.
Hi, Seth. Thank you so much for having me again.
It's an honor, Ila, and always a pleasure to have guests who have already appeared on the podcast back. One thing less is in terms of the prep, because you guys already know the drill. I don't have to spend too much time, but yeah, it's always good to catch up as well. For listeners who are listening to Ila for the first time and wondering what we're talking about, Ila had done a wonderful episode not too long ago about the headhunters of Nagaland and her experience visiting the villages in Nagaland. So we'll definitely make sure to link that in the show notes as well. But yeah, Ila, thank you so much. And once again, for listeners who are listening to you for the first time, would you like to give a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Hi, I'm Ila. I'm based in Delhi and I work in the nonprofit sector. I enjoy traveling and I write about my explorations and adventures on my blog and more recently on my Substack newsletter. This sort of gives me a nice way to reflect on my travels through writing and through photos and just basically remembering certain moments that stood out while traveling to different places.
Yeah, absolutely. Aina is the name of Ila's newsletter as well, and we'll make sure to link it in the show notes so all of you can subscribe and follow Ila's travels. But Ila, where are you taking us and our listeners to today?
So today I'm going to be taking you to Nepal. I recently did a 9-day trip to Nepal, and I would love to share more about where all I went and what I did.
Yeah, wonderful, and really excited about this. Maybe not it's not the first time, but one of the rare occasions when we are going a little out of India, right? Even though the podcast says it's India Travel Podcast. And by the way, even though we're covering an itinerary on Nepal, in no way am I a proponent of Akhand Bharat or whatever that goes on and claims our neighboring countries to be our own. But really delighted to be covering Nepal as well. And I was chatting with Ila and telling that it's basically really close and almost like a domestic itinerary, right? You don't need a visa as an Indian citizen. You don't need a visa to travel to Nepal. All you need is passport, and in some places there's also land borders, so you could easily drive into Nepal. So really looking forward to this itinerary. But tell us a little bit more, Ila. Tell us a little bit about when you did this trip, how long of an itinerary this was, and give us a few details about the itinerary as well before we dive into the details.
Sure. So I did this in winter last year. I have always wanted to explore Nepal because, as you said, it's really close by. It's very culturally rich, and it's known for like a lot of the treks and hikes, especially the Everest Base Camp, which is what most travelers go to Nepal for. I had been to Nepal for just 3 days a couple of years back, but I didn't really get to explore it. So I just sort of hopped onto this opportunity to just make the most of good weather. So typically October, November is a good time to visit Nepal, especially like Kathmandu and neighboring areas because it's warm in the day and pleasant at night. I knew I didn't have enough time to do like a big trek. So I just thought, why not explore the cultural side of Nepal? So that's what this trip was about. It was a 9-day trip, basically like weekend to weekend when I had some time off from work. And I basically collaborated with an organization called the Community Homestay Network, which is basically like a social enterprise in Nepal that supports a network of homestays run by local women and families. So it's a way for them to sort of get hosts to meet travelers from around the world and get travelers to get a taste of the local way of life. And like most of the revenue goes to the community. So in that sense, it does sort of help with like the community education, development, and just bringing together like everyone involved in the tourism space to offer like meaningful travel experiences. So I was really excited by the itineraries that they had put together because they were very meaningful and very aligned to the way I like to travel, which is like really immerse myself in a particular place. It's not really about checking off, ticking off the boxes of ABC other places to cover, but also really like interacting with local people, trying local food, and just experiencing different things. So in that sense, I thought it was a great way to explore the cultural side of Nepal, which is often not really talked about or not really explored to the same extent as the Himalayan treks are. So that's how I ended up going to Nepal. Our trip started from Patan, basically flew in from Delhi to Kathmandu, but as you had also mentioned, you can also go by road. I would have loved to do that if I had more time, but since I didn't, I sort of just took a direct flight. So that was very seamless. So in Patan, so basically the Kathmandu Valley has like three Darbar squares, which are like the three kingdoms, the Newar kingdoms that rule Kathmandu, Patan and Bhaktapur before they were all unified. And all of these are like UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Many of them faced a lot of damage during the earthquake and are currently being repaired. But Patan is one of the older neighborhoods where, like, you just walk down the narrow alleys and you can literally see like windows that have very intricate wooden carvings, old heritage buildings, and like tiny temples on almost every intersection. So it's almost like the perfect way to like enter Nepal and just explore it on foot before really going to any other place.
That's actually brilliant. And before you even go deeper into the itinerary, right? Firstly, a quick shout out to CHN, Community Homestay Network, because definitely they're doing a great job, and the way they're basically making travel a lot more sustainable also, right? Nepal, of a lot of other places as well, is also easily one of the places that is a I don't want to say victim, because it is necessary, but it is something that is often plagued by over tourism also, you could say, right? Given that, like I mentioned, there's a lot of Himalayan treks happening, plus there's people visiting the country as well. So it could easily be overwhelming in terms of the over tourism there. So they're doing a great job in terms of making this a lot more sustainable. So kudos to you as well, having partnered with them in doing this trip. And just in general, right? Like I mentioned, the cultural side of Nepal, it doesn't get as much mainstream space in terms of prominence as well, as much as some of the Everest-related treks do. A lot of people focus on that, so I'm glad that we're talking more about that. And while I was doing the research, when I was looking up about the valley, and it's just so beautiful in terms of how culturally rich it is, the type of architecture, and even a lot of the other art forms that come out of the place. They're so rich. So I'm really glad that we're doing this, and also being our 150th episode, I'm really glad that this is turned out to be so unique from that perspective too. So in terms of the overview of the trip, you said that you started off with Patan. What else? Just in a quick summary, what are the other places that you covered during the trip, Ila?
So I started with Patan, and then we took a domestic. So I basically traveled with my mother. So we took a domestic flight from Kathmandu to Bharatpur, from where we went to Barauli, which is the Tribhuvan National Park. And then from there we came back to Patan, after which we went to Bhaktapur, which is about an hour away, followed by Panauti, again, something that's very close by. And then came back to Patan and Kathmandu. So in that sense, it was,
Okay.
I think Bharatpur was like slightly further away. All the other places were in and around Kathmandu region.
Okay, wonderful. So, really looking forward to this overall itinerary. And given that you had a good 8-9 day period planned for this, I'm sure you got. It wasn't in a rush, right? Otherwise, usually it would have been a rush trip if you're just planning it for a weekend or a little bit more than a weekend type of thing. So I'm glad that you got some time. So let's start off and explore this place. Take us with you, Ila, and let us know where you started off this trip and what are some of the things you indulged yourself in as you were exploring these neighborhoods in Nepal?
Sure. So yeah, as you said, like we didn't want to like pack our trip with too much, because sometimes you also just need to be in a space and just do nothing and just roam around to really experience it. So in that sense, I wanted the trip to have a mix of different kinds of things, which is how we planned the itinerary. So it wasn't spending too much time in one place. At the same time, we didn't want to do too many things either. So we started with Patan, being so culturally rich in terms of just the architecture that I just spoke about, in terms of, very old streets, heritage buildings. Even like walking through the narrow alleys is like an experience in itself, because you have all these intricately carved windows, a lot of artisans at work. There's a very old world feel to the entire experience. So I think that was a great start to the trip. Unlike like maybe Tamil, which is a little more commercial in nature. Tamil is like the backpackers' starting point, so it has all the hostels and all the shops, and typically travelers start from there. Very similar to Paharganj in Delhi. But Patan, in that sense, was just the opposite. It was literally like going back in time and taking in the complete cultural side of things away from so much commercialization. Patan, of course, is around, like the whole life revolves around the Darbar Square. It's located in Lalitpur. And basically, Patan and Kathmandu are like sister cities, like almost like Hyderabad and Secunderabad. So it's like two different parts of the valley, but like connected. And like a lot of the Newari community people live here. It's known for its stunning Newar architecture, and it is also one of the oldest Buddhist cities. So it has a lot of Buddhist and Hindu influences, and almost every courtyard, like by courtyard, I mean there are a lot of like communal housing sort of societies. So like almost every 2 feet, like you can see an intersection of roads that leads you to a tiny neighborhood around a park, and like all the houses are around the park. And in between the park, there will be like a temple or like just a stupa that the community sort of takes care of and gathers around for festivals and so on. It is also the home to the ancient royal palace of the Malla dynasty. So this is also located near the Darbar Square. And you have a lot of artisans working on wooden souvenirs, a lot of tanka painting schools, a lot of shops selling like very local Nepali goods. Like one of my favorite snacks to eat was something called titora, which I had first had in Nagaland, in fact. And it was imported from Nepal, and it was really nice to finally have it in Nepal. It's basically dried candied fruit, but yeah, it tastes really nice, and they have like a lot of flavors. So Patan was for us like just a way to just walk around, like no agenda in mind, just explore the place on foot. We happened to reach over the weekend when the municipal elections were taking place. So everything was shut,
Okay.
which was actually a blessing in disguise, because the streets were empty because everyone had gone home to vote. So streets that otherwise would have like a lot of motorbikes and a lot of people walking on them, like were just deserted, which made the whole experience a lot more like nicer and calmer, and like we could just walk at our own pace and discover different parts of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
There's also like a tiny temple called the Golden Temple. It was very close to the hotel where we were staying, and it was lovely because again it was a tiny neighborhood temple, yet it had a lot of rich architecture. It was a very old structure. We happened to meet the priest, and like he was kind enough to take us around, and like you had places to light up all the candles, and it was just generally a very serene experience. Like otherwise I'm not a big fan of temples because I just hate how crowded they get, but this was lovely because it had this whole neighborhood temple feel to it. Yeah, so that was nice. In Patan, we actually didn't really do much else. I think the charm of Patan was all about walking and trying like momos in different like street side shops and just taking in the vibe of the place.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of these, at least the areas around the squares, are very, walking friendly, right? Obviously, like some areas, it has no vehicular traffic. That also helps. But otherwise, also, it's very easily navigable on foot. That's a great thing, I think, to get from place to place. And even in terms of the architecture, right? I think that's one of the mainstays of your visit, and even in terms of this area, right? And one of the things I was actually pretty impressed by, Ila, was how much a lot of these monuments and these temples and monasteries have been impacted by these literally recurring and repeated earthquakes, right? And they've been built back up as though nothing happened. So that was also very impressive for me. And just walking around, going into all of these temples and the Darbar Square, which also has like the close by the Royal Palace now, a museum and stuff like that. So just experiencing all of that, I think that's the biggest thing to do, right? I mean, you're seeing a lot of things, but that's the main experience, I would say, while you're in places like these. And like you also pointed out, this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site as well, right, along with the other Darbar squares in Bhaktapur as well as Kathmandu. So definitely make it a point to visit here. In terms of the Golden Temple as well, maybe it's not as grand as the namesake in India in Amritsar, but definitely, like you pointed out, it's a beautiful temple, smaller in scale, but very rich history as well. And a lot of these places, right, Patan and even the other places we'll touch upon later in the episode, they came into prominence, or rose to prominence at least, during the period of these Malla kings, right? That's when they were all very popular, and these were all three of these, Bhaktapur, Patan, and Kathmandu, were actually independent, all of them Newari kingdoms, but they were independent kingdoms before the Gorkhas, actually the Gorkhali kingdom. They invaded later in the 18th century and unified them again and made Kathmandu as the capital. So a lot of rich history around the place, and when you're walking around, obviously you get to experience a lot of these different temples and monuments. And you mentioned about I forget the name, what is it called again? The candy, the dried fruit candy
Titora.
that you tried out? Titora, yeah. So you tried that out. What about some of the other cuisines in the area? I know it's given it's closer to India, there might definitely be influences of the type of food we eat, but I'm sure even in terms of Buddhist influences, you have a lot of those. Any special kind of cuisine or dishes that you'd like to call out?
Yes, two of them. One is like the jhol momos. So it's typically like the steamed momos that we get in India as well. But what makes it unique over there is that they have something called jhol, which is like a peanut sesame sauce. So typically locals love dipping their momos in this sauce. So it's called jhol momos. You get it in some places in India, but it's not as popular as it is in Nepal. So that's something definitely worth trying out. And a lot of street side shops have some amazing buff chol momos. So I think any place that you see making fresh momos is like a good place to go and just try it out. The other thing would be like the Nepali thakali thali, very similar to Indian food, but obviously has its nuances. So it is like rice. It is rice based, but you have like different condiments. So like you have a dal, which is very similar to the yellow dal you get in India. Some fermented vegetables, gobi aloo, and like either chicken or mutton. If you're vegetarian, you can go in for a vegetarian version. So the food is very similar to like an Indian thali, but it still has its own Nepali nuances. So it's very fulfilling. So if you are in Nepal, I would definitely suggest eating that. My mother and I ate that for almost every meal, and we like really stuffed ourselves with food, but I think it was entirely worth it.
I mean, you're also walking around a lot, right? So you have to make sure that you're taking breaks to re-energize yourself. And yeah, my hidden ulterior motive is also that I haven't had breakfast yet, so I brought up cuisine early on in the conversation, which is fine. But yeah, any other points of interest that you covered in Patan before we move to the next point of interest?
So Patan sort of was like it was our base. So the next place that we went to was Bharatpur. So after Bharatpur, we actually came back to Patan and then did like experienced a different side of Patan. So maybe I'll come to that after talking about Bharatpur.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, give us a little bit of a background about this place you're going to and what kind of things you did in Bharatpur.
Sure. So Bharatpur is like a little far away from Kathmandu. So we had to take a domestic flight to get there. Once we like flew from Kathmandu to Bharatpur, we had about like a 2 hour road journey to the Tribhuvan National Park, which is essentially a national park that's known for its rhinos in particular. But why we decided to go there was because there's a community homestay there called the Baroli Community Homestay that we wanted to experience. So it wasn't just about the national park, but also wanted to see what this homestay is like. Because it's a homestay that's run by an entire village. So many families come together and have constructed these one room mud houses in between their village where people can come and stay, and the entire community sort of gets involved in maintaining the place, taking care of the tourists, creating cultural experiences for them. So I just wanted to see what this experience is like, because typically when you have like a rural homestay, either it's made to look like a village, or it's
Right.
just, or it's a hotel with like certain just certain features, or like a visit to the village and they get you back to the hotel. This was run by the community, and it was like living amidst them and cooking with them and going around with them. So I thought it was a very unique model, and I wanted to experience that. So it's basically in the Chitwan National Park, and the village is basically where the Tharu community lives. Tharus are like one of the tribes of Nepal, and they have again their own customs. They come from like the forest region, so in that sense, they are very close to like the forest. And they basically took us out on the safari to see rhinos. The place is full of mustard fields, and we happened to be there at the right time when they were all in full bloom. So it made for a very picturesque setting, even just walking around the village in the evening and catching the sunset. The safari in the national park as well was really nice because the forest itself is very dense. So, irrespective of spotting any animals, just driving through in an open jeep, it was amazing because it was just a very dense forest on all sides. So that itself was an experience. The forest is alongside a river called the Narayani River, which is also where a lot of the animals come to drink water. And that made for an amazing place to just sit and sort of enjoy a cup of tea. So that was our sundowner on one of the evenings. At night, we cooked with one of the members of the Tharu community. So we actually went into her home and cooked a very basic meal. Like it was just like fish, chicken, saag, rice, mixed vegetables, all cooked like the way they cook, on any other night. But it was lovely to just sit inside her home, and like she was cooking on a chulha, which is painful for the eyes because the smoke really gets into your eyes.
Yeah.
But it was nice to be able to do that with her. And I think it's just it's a much more enriching and fulfilling way of interacting with local people outside of the realm of tourism. Because here we're just cooking a regular meal and like cutting vegetables and chatting about her day to day life and learning more about what life is like for them. So I think that was very special for us.
Definitely, and also it's a little different also from the initial leg of the journey, right? Patan was a little more culturally oriented. This one is more closer to nature, right? You did the safari as well. You got to stay with the locals in this case, so that way also there is a lot of variety. Any luck with spotting? I know I don't try to call that out each time anybody does a safari, because the point of the safari is not just sighting, right? Sighting is just a part of it. But any luck with the animals and the rhinos, especially?
Yeah, we saw a lot of rhinos. We saw a
Okay.
crocodile. We saw spotted deer, barking deer, a wild boar, eagles, lots of birds actually. So like we did
Okay.
spot quite a bit. Yeah, no tigers and stuff, but I think the ride itself made up for it.
Yeah, lovely. And this was what, a day and a night or a couple day type of a stay here in Bharatpur, or how long was this leg?
This was 2 days.
Two
So
days.
yeah,
Okay.
we got in on like in the afternoon on a Monday, and we basically had the whole of Monday and Tuesday there, and then we left on Wednesday morning. So we had about 2 days. It was very restful because the safari took up a couple of hours. We could roam around, like walk on foot around the village and just meet different people. They were all very friendly. So anyone who saw us knew we were like just travelers and would be happy to come and speak to us. So that was really nice. And the cooking was at night after the safari. And then the next day, again, we had a lot of time to just spend by the mustard fields. And then we also had a performance that the women of the Tharu tribe did. It's
Okay.
basically a tribal dance that they typically do during weddings and harvest season and any kind of festival, basically. But they were kind enough to dance for us, and most of the men play like these indigenous instruments that they have created themselves, while the women dance and sing. So that was very interactive because they also invite you to like shake a leg with them. And it was also a way for us to meet other travelers who we hadn't interacted with as yet, who were
Okay.
also around. So it was like a cultural performance put together for all the people who were visiting.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, looks like a fulfilling time you've had in Bharatpur. And what was the plan after spending a couple of days here in Bharatpur? Was it back to Patan, you said, or
Yes.
where do you move to next? Okay.
Yes. So after Baroli, we went back to Patan. So again, it was taking a flight back. But this time we decided to stay with the host family. So the first time when we landed in Patan, it was at a regular boutique hotel called Traditional Stay, just to sort of get a sense of the space. But this time it was more about spending time with the people because we had already seen the Darbar Square and Patan is not that big. So we had 2 full days when we had arrived, like the whole weekend to explore it on foot. So this time it was more about spending time with the host family in their home. So we
Okay.
were matched with a small family with 2 kids and 2 parents, and like they took care of us. The kids basically took care of us. So that was really nice because we were exploring the neighborhood that we had walked on foot over the weekend, but through the eyes of this new family that had adopted us for like 2 days. So it was really nice being with them, and we were living in one of their rooms within their house, and basically enjoyed the mouth-watering home-cooked food made by our host, and got a chance to talk about just day-to-day life and like get to know them. So like one of the kids was in school and the other one was like a hotel management graduate and was working with a hotel. So just getting their perspective on daily life. They were very curious about India, especially Telugu movies, which came out as a surprise to us because we had no idea that like Nepal has Allu Arjun fans. So everywhere
Oh,
we
okay.
went, we were just bombarded with questions about Tollywood.
Yeah, I was going to ask if it was Natu Natu fever, but yeah, looks like it's Allu Arjun fans here.
Yep. Yeah, but the interesting thing here was like the host, the lady's brother is actually a Pova painting artist. So they organized like a Pova painting workshop with him, which was lovely because it was like literally getting to not just learn about this art form, but also try it out. Obviously, there's not much you can do in a couple of hours, but he was kind enough to like give a very basic stenciled drawing, and I could then paint it. But then through that, he basically explained to me what this art form is all about.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that. What are these called, Ila?
It's called Pauba painting, which is basically a traditional religious painting style practiced by the Newari people. It's very similar to like the Buddhist Tanka painting, which is a lot more popular in India.
Right.
So if you actually look at Pauba paintings, it's like you might just mistake it for a Tanka painting, but there are some minor nuances that actually like show you that they're quite different. The Pawa painting basically has a lot of Hindu and Buddhist mythological characters and scenes. So it's got a lot of deities and mandalas and monuments. But the style is very similar to Tanka. So it's very intricate, a lot of detailing, and it takes a lot of time to create like every single painting that they come up with. So I basically got like a stenciled drawing of Om, which is written in Ranjana Lipi, which is their traditional script, and basically got to paint that. But in the course of painting that, the artist who was teaching me, he basically told me about how this painting form was actually like a form of meditation for its practitioners, and how like even mastering like a single pattern, like so a lot of leaves and waves and clouds as just like the background images of these paintings like around the deities. But even for like each one of those, either a leaf or a wave, it actually takes weeks to master that, like to get the technique right. So for a lot of artists, that becomes their form of meditation because they have to observe their breath and regulate their breath while painting. Because the calmer you are, the sharper your focus, and the focus
Yeah.
then reflects in how sturdy your hand is because it's very intricate strokes. So yeah, it was very interesting to do this workshop with them.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And yeah, the meditative part of it as well. I mean, obviously, I'm not like a artist or anything. I haven't been like anything close to that, so I've never looked at it from that perspective. But whatever you're saying does make so much sense, right? Especially for something so intricate, it is necessary that you're almost in that meditative state of mind, so that you're calm and there's little to no interruptions while you're doing something so intricate like this. So I'm glad that you got a chance to actually experience this. And it was what, a couple hour workshop, you said?
Yes, it was about 3 hours. It extended into the
Okay.
evening because, like, we enjoyed learning more about the art form, and he was more than happy to share more about it. Yeah, it went on for a couple of hours, but it was lovely because it was within the homestay itself, and it was just a way to feel closer to the culture, and like it was more of an immersive experience of understanding these technicalities versus just going and buying like a pawa painting as a souvenir. This
Yeah.
was a lot more interactive and immersive.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you got to do that. And you mentioned that this is local to the region, right? To Nepal,
Yes, yes,
basically, as against Tanka. Tanka, I think, is more Tibetan influence, right? At least,
yeah.
yeah. Okay. I'm glad you got to enjoy this side of the experience as well, trying out something that is local. And also, at the end of it, you have a souvenir, right? Something you can take back.
Yes.
So that is great about the experience, too. What next, Ila? What next do you have in mind?
So the next day, we left for Bhaktapur, which was on the way to Panauti. So like Bhaktapur is again, it was a past kingdom. It's called the city of
Right.
devotees, and it's also known for Newar traditions, food, artisans. It's one of the most popular tourist destinations in Nepal outside of Kathmandu. It's not very far from Kathmandu, so in that sense, a lot of people do Bhaktapur and Kathmandu before setting off on a trek. Um, this place also has its own Darbar Square, which is very similar to the one in Patan, except the temples are much more massive. But there are a lot of smaller squares and chalks. What really stands out in Bhaktapur, which is unique to it, is the pottery shops. So there are a lot of potters. So even when you're crossing from like one neighborhood to the other, you can see a lot of workshops, shops of like potters, as well as like on the streets itself, you can see pots laid out like of all sizes and shapes. It makes for a lovely sight, and I wish we also got a chance to maybe try our hand at pottery here, but we didn't have enough time. It was just a pit stop before heading to Panauti, which was our next destination. Though
Okay.
we were told to try out the local mishti doi, which is like the sweet curd, which is apparently very famous in the Darbar Square. So that's something that we made sure to have before we proceeded to Panauti.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's always good to try these things. And yeah, to your point, right? Again, one of the other kingdoms, and Patan was the capital of sorts, you could say. There was a few other squares as well. Probably these are the smaller squares you were referring to, right? Taumadi Square was one, and the Tatra Square is one. I don't have to mention. I think all of these places and the squares around, they have lots of temples too,
Yes, yes.
right? Ayla? Yeah, so if somebody is interested in a more laid back itinerary where you get to explore the different temples as well as monasteries, they have an equal amount of Buddhist influence as well, so you could definitely try that out. And again, well, one of the other commonality is very walking friendly, right? You could pretty much navigate on foot to most of these places without breaking a sweat. That is also one thing that is very beneficial in older cities like this, where you can get about by foot. You don't really have to rely on transport, public or your own, to explore the region. And after spending time in Bhaktapur, you mentioned, where was the next stop you mentioned?
Panauti. So yeah,
Okay,
it was I think about half an hour away from Bhaktapur. So in that sense, Bhaktapur was more like
right.
just a day, like not even a day, like maybe couple of hours, just to go around the Darbar Square and get a sense of the place. But it was en route to Panauti, which is outside of Kathmandu. So we actually ventured into the hilly countryside away from the city. So that was lovely because the drive had like, we passed through a lot of fields, potato farms, rice farms, a lot of orange trees. So it was very different after being, yeah, like, in Patan, for all this while.
Sure.
So Panauti also is very close. It's a village. It's close to the old town. And our homestay there was again with a host family of five parents, one child, and like a nephew. So like they really took care of us. there isn't a lot to do in Panauti. So, in that sense, again, the focus here was to get to know our hosts, spend time with them, and just explore the place on foot. Because just generally, like the life, yeah, the day to day life and the basically just the vibe is very different from Patan and like the Chitwan National Park. So, in that sense, it was a different experience, but just sort of just hanging around and observing life.
I was actually sorry here before you mention more about the trip. I was very curious about the name itself, right? I mean, in Hindi, I think Panauti is usually referred to as unlucky or bad omen or that type of thing,
Right,
right?
right.
If I'm not wrong. I was curious. I don't know if you found out anything about more about what there was to the name, or it meant if it meant something different. One of the things I came across was I think there's a river close by called as Punyavati. It's probably some sort of corruption of that name. That's how
Right.
it got the name. But I was just curious if you knew anything more.
I actually don't. For some reason, like I didn't know the Hindi meaning,
Oh, okay.
so it didn't strike me as an odd name. But once I came back, everyone I spoke to, and I said I went to Panauti, they would just laugh, and I was like, that's when I realized I should have asked like what this means and where it's come from. But yeah, it didn't strike me at that point.
Yeah, I mean, just the vicinity as well, because you can. I think one of the things I didn't ask, can you get by with Hindi and English in Nepal, Ila?
You can.
Okay.
Most people understand Hindi, so that should not be a problem at all. Most people involved in tourism related stuff also understand
Sure.
English. So, in that sense, we didn't have an issue anywhere. But Hindi is widely spoken, and people are also very enthusiastic about Telugu because they're also into movies. So, they do pick
Yeah.
up on words as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that is great. But yeah, but Panauti, you were telling more about Panauti. Please come on. Sorry for interrupting.
So as I said, there isn't much to do in Panauti. It's a really small town. So we just walked around. It has its own set of local temples, which was like nice to visit with the host family. But yeah, we had since we had a lot of time, we did a day trip to the Namo Buddha monastery, which is located in a
Okay.
place called Namo Buddha, which is atop a hill with some like stunning views of snow peaks. So I would definitely recommend going there if any of the listeners do go to Panauti. It's like any other Tibetan Buddhist monastery, but it's extremely serene, and because it's in a place that's not very commercial and crowded, it's mostly like monks who are there and local people who visit. But it makes for a lovely place to just spend the day and walk around. It's a fairly big monastery, so like there are walking trails along the outer boundary of the place, and each of these are almost like viewpoints to see the snow peaks. So
Yeah.
it's a lovely day visit. We decided to go here like just spontaneously. It wasn't part of our itinerary, but because we realized that there isn't that much to do, our host's nephew kindly offered to like take us there, and was like it made for a fun outing with him.
How long of a trip do you say this was from Panauti?
It was an hour away by road.
Okay.
So we took a taxi, but I think there are also local buses and stuff available that people can take. It's the biggest monastery in the region, and I think, yeah, it's definitely worth a visit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this region has significant Buddhist influence, right? Even since the beginning of time, I think it was Nepal from where even Buddha or Siddhartha, as you, he was known at that time, he came from. There is significant influence, but I believe even the influence kind of or the Buddhist population kind of went up quite a bit as and when these invasions from Muslim kingdoms started in Bihar and the surrounding area, right? That's when like a lot more Buddhists started moving to this region. So yeah, a lot of significant Buddhist monasteries and temples is something you could also make a part of your overall itinerary. And Namo Buddha,
Yeah.
right? That's what this monastery is called. That can also be a part of it. And what did you do after this? Was this pretty much your time in Panauti, you would say?
Yeah, we had a lot of time to just be at home with our hosts. So it was more of like conversation and like sharing notes about our respective places. What was fun was like our host was like a great cook. So it was lovely just learning how to make momos, and like
Okay.
she was very eager to like feed us very traditional dishes. So we got to eat sale roti and other just very unique chutneys that are made specifically in Nepal. So it was nice to have home cooked food and also give a hand at it. So it was really nice.
Did you find Nepali food a tad bit spicier than, let's say, what the Indian palate is used to?
It definitely is spicy, but I'm from Telangana, so in that sense, I didn't find the food
Right.
very spicy.
Okay.
But yes, I think
Yeah.
if North Indians from India go to Nepal, they might find it a little more spicy than what they're used to.
Yeah, but that was I mean, I'm also from South India, so I am used to spicy food, but I felt it was a tad bit spicier, especially because I was almost like, oh yeah, like it's in North India, so it might be a little more milder. I went in with that expectation, so I found it a little more spicy, but yeah, definitely something you could manage. I'm glad that you also got a chance, and reminds me, Faiza tried her hand for the first time at making momos yesterday as
Oh
well.
wow!
So yeah, more reason for me to get hungry, and I think it just shows that I'm hungry on this episode. Anyway, but yeah, they did turn out pretty well, so maybe I should go request her to make another round after this episode. But yeah, after Panauti, what was the plan now, Ila?
After Panauti, we made our way back to Patan for the last leg of our journey. We basically wanted to attend a Ranjana Lipi workshop. So Ranjana Lipi is
Okay.
a local, it's the traditional script of the Newar people. It's an ancient script that dates back to the 11th century. So people used to use it to write Sanskrit and Nepal Bhasha. It is also used by Tibetan Buddhists, but it's called, I think, Lanzia in Tibet. But it's
Okay.
considered the main standard Nepali calligraphic strip. So it's similar to like Devanagari that we use for Hindi,
Okay.
but in Nepali. So like in that sense, it's a traditional script, and we thought it would be interesting to just try our hand at it. This workshop was again organized by the Community Homestay Network to sort of raise awareness, because a lot of Newari people themselves don't know about the script. So for them, it was an interesting workshop to even get back to their roots and their culture. So we were actually the only travelers per se attending that workshop. Everyone else were like local people. And the workshop was conducted by two members of another community homestay in Kirtipur, which we couldn't visit. But since they were coming down for this workshop, we got to interact with them. The workshop style was interesting as well, because we were greeted with what they call shagun, which is like a traditional Newari drink called Ila, which is like a liquor made of rice grains, millet. So very similar to like rice beer or rice wine that you get in the Northeast, even in India. And what they call samay bhaji, which is like an assortment of traditional Newari snacks. So it typically has like dried fish, beaten rice, some beans, so like lobia, some meat, and what we called jalebi, or like I don't know what else we call it.
Yeah.
It's called jangir or
I
something
think
else.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think, I don't know if it's a South Indian thing, jangri, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So we call
yeah.
that here, like that's what we call it here, but like over there they call it jerry. So that was very interesting
Okay.
because it tastes exactly the same, but they refer to it as jerry, and it's really popular there.
Okay.
So that was also part of the Samay Bhaji, and it's offered to guests. Typically during festivals and weddings and any celebration that involves a feast. So it was really nice that they included this in the workshop, because it also added a touch of like food and like something interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually going to ask, but I think you mentioned that as well. Basically, this is the same, the Ranjana Lipi that you're saying. Is it the same that I think the main script is also called as Nepal Bhaja, right?
Yes.
That's what the main script is referred to as, but this is the calligraphic version that you're saying, right? Ranjana Lipi is.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, quite the unique experiences, be it this or the Pava paintings that you also tried. Usually, again, using myself as the median here, but usually in a trip, you focus a lot of your time on going and seeing places, doing things, whatever it might be, outdoorsy types of things. But it's great that you actually mixed up things like these workshops, right? They don't take up too much time. At the same time, they expose you to so much of the culture as well of the place, right? Just the background and. Like we found out, it's also very meditative, and especially if it comes with a serving of samay bhaji and Ila. Ila is what you mentioned was
Yes.
the rice beer.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure Sachin Tendulkar would have liked that. So yeah, pardon my poor jokes today. I'm just a little hungry, I think. But yeah, like it definitely kind of enriches and takes your overall trip to the next level, right? In terms of just being it a lot more immersive, and you're getting to interact so much with the locals as well. And especially in this case, you mentioned a lot of the participants were locals, right? Not necessarily just travelers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, those interactions are also something to cherish and just enhance your experience so much more. So the last leg of Panauti was that, last leg of Patan, was that mostly focused on this workshop, or was there more time for you to do anything else?
So the reason we came back and kept enough time was for this workshop. But yeah, as you said, it was just about 2 hours, so it wasn't that time consuming. It was even more interesting because it was using like it was a script that we use bamboo pens and ink and canvas paper for. And like most of the time went in like practicing different alphabets, and then writing a word of our choice once we've practiced it enough. So in that sense, it was very interesting and immersive. But we still had like the rest of the day to go around and do things that we hadn't gotten a chance to see before. So that included going to Kathmandu. So all this while we were based in Patan, but
Right.
after the workshop, we decided to move to Kathmandu city and visit the famous Pashupatinath temple that my mother was very keen to visit. But also the Bodhnath stupa, which is essentially like a stupa, and then around the big stupa there are a lot of Tibetan shops. So it's almost like the Tibetan hub of Nepal. So that was very interesting, and I wish we had more time to just spend over there. But
Yeah.
yeah, like it made for a good evening visit. So all of these are like your traditional tourist spots. So it was nice that
Yeah.
we could also cover these and not just do like an offbeat itinerary. Like we could fit in everything. We
Yeah.
also had a chance to attend like a sound bath meditation session at Avata, which is like it's a wellness company again that's part of the same Community Homestay Network, but they're doing very interesting things. So it was interesting to try out something that is very new age, but at the same time has its root in Tibetan Buddhism. So like they play different instruments, basically immerse you in sound and sensations, and it can be very meditative. So that was an interesting experience just to end the trip on that note.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What's it called? It's the sound bath meditation, you said?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, I think that's the first time I'm coming across anything like that. But also, going back to your point, these places are also very close to each other, right? Like, I think Patan to Kathmandu, what is that? Probably doesn't take an hour even.
Yeah, it's just about 15 to 20 minutes based on traffic. So it can be less
Drive,
or more.
right? Yeah,
Yeah, they're just sister cities. So it's similar to like Hyderabad and Sikandrabad, like
yeah.
just a road that connects the two.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think, yeah, like you mentioned as well, very, very fulfilling in terms of not just the different types of experiences you had, but even in terms of the places and things you saw as well, right? From the cultural leg of the journey in Patan and the different darbar squares and the temples and the monasteries and stuff like that, to living with the locals, right? That was also a big part of the experience. You did that both in Panauti as well as in Bharatpur when you visited the wildlife sanctuary, and yeah, there's the nature part of it added to it as well. So yeah, very, very fulfilling experience, and obviously to cap it all up, you got a chance to do some of the local workshops too, be it the Ranjan LP or the Paba paintings, right? So hopefully, if you add the pottery workshop to the mix next time, it'll kind of cover off a lot of the different, even local art forms there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any final thoughts or things we did not touch upon during the conversation, Ila?
I think we've pretty much covered everything. I think the itinerary, was really well done, and I think all credit to that for that goes to the Community Homestay Network. And I think what I took away from the trip was that, like, similar to the Northeast, some places that you aren't very well aware of, and you don't want to do a typical tourist itinerary, it helps to like partner with organizations like this, because like a lot of these experiences that we just talked about, right, like whether it's the painting workshop or the Ranjana Lipi workshop, or just being set up with the right hosts, who
Yeah.
actually feel like family and you can really get to know and interact with. Like I'm actually in touch with all of them even now. So I think for that, it's really important to be able to, get those experiences, get access to those. And for this, something like the Community Homestay Network just helps, because they curate like these offbeat itineraries, knowing the culture of the place. Very similar to like how it was done even for Nagaland that we spoke about in the last episode,
Yeah.
where I wouldn't know where to go and what to do and what to eat. Like discovering it by yourself has its own charm, and that's a whole different experience by itself. But it takes a lot longer to be able to do that, and not everyone may have that kind of time to be able to really like figure all of this out by yourself. So if you're doing a quick trip, like a week long trip, I think it sometimes helps just partner with local people who really know the region and also want you to experience the region as a local person. So I think this trip really highlighted that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. A big shout out to Community Homestay Network, and we'll make sure to include their socials and their website as well on the show notes, so anybody interested can check them out. But as always, thank you so much, Ila. I think your voice and the way you speak is absolutely perfect for podcasts, somebody for listening, because it's very calm. You don't rush into it. You see, I'm talking like a deer in front of headlights right now, but you're very calm, very focused. So even if somebody listens to this at 1.2 or 1.5x, your voice and your tone just comes across as perfect. But even beyond that, just beyond the voice, for covering such immersive experiences, right? That's why we come back to you as well all the time, because you have this way of travel where it's the right balance, it's the right mix. It's not always too much rush. At the same time, it's not leaving it very open-ended where you risk missing out on things and experiences that are really the core of that region, right? So thank you so much again for this wonderful itinerary and showing us not just the cultural aspects of Nepal, but giving us a good insight into the Newari people, and even with a little bit of a sprinkling of nature and different types of art forms, etc. the region has to offer. So thank you so much. We look forward to following your work, and for anybody interested, obviously Ila's socials also will be included in the show notes along with Ila's Substack newsletter. Thanks again, Ila, and it was a pleasure to have you as always.
Thank you so much. It was lovely speaking to you again and also revisiting my trip. Like it almost felt like I went back and like lived through the trip again. So yeah, thank you so much for having me again.
That was yet another great episode on the Musafir Stories. Make sure to show us some love by sharing the podcast with your friends and family. We are on Instagram and Twitter at Musafir Stories. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM podcast app or the website. Follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram.